Imagine standing alone in a crowded room, your back turned to everyone, when suddenly a tingling sensation creeps up your spine. Without thinking, you turn, and there, across the sea of strangers, someone's eyes are fixed directly on you. How did you know? Science calls it scopaesthesia. But 5,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the ancient Sumerians wrote about this very phenomenon on clay tablets, calling it something far more profound. They believed the human eye was not merely a receiver of light, but a projector of power, capable of affecting the world and the people within it. Tonight, we trace this ancient mystery from the reed-pressed tablets of Mesopotamia to the laboratories of modern neuroscience. You know the feeling. You are standing somewhere ordinary, and perhaps in a quiet room or walking down a city street, when something shifts in the air around you. There is no sound, no movement you can identify, and yet your skin begins to prickle at the back of your neck. A warmth spreads across your shoulders, a subtle pressure that has no visible source. Something in you, some ancient knowing that lives beneath thought, tells you that you are not alone. You turn, almost without deciding to, and there across the space is another pair of eyes locked directly onto yours. For one suspended moment, the world holds its breath. How did you know? What invisible thread connected your awareness to the attention of a stranger? This experience, this strange and universal knowing, has followed humanity through every age and every culture. It whispered about in languages now forgotten and still discussed in laboratories today. Most people surveyed say they have had this felt experience of someone looking at them from behind, which is immediately confirmed when they turn around. And most have also had the converse experience, staring at someone in a crowd who then turns around to look back. The sensation is visceral and undeniable. It is a tingling, a warming, a feeling of being touched by something you cannot see. And it raises a question that has haunted curious minds for millennia. Is this merely coincidence, a trick of heightened senses in a watchful brain, or does it point to something far older, something woven into the very fabric of what it means to be human? Tonight, we will explore this mystery together, following it backward through time to the very dawn of civilization. The psychic staring effect, sometimes called scopaesthesia, is the claimed ability of a person to detect being stared at. And it is one of the most commonly reported, yet scientifically elusive experiences in human life. The idea was first formally explored by psychologist Edward Titchener in 1898, after students in his classes reported being able to feel when somebody was looking at them, even though they could not see the person. They described a strange stiffness in the neck, an uncomfortable awareness that drew their attention backward. By 1913, over 2/3 of students questioned in surveys reported having experienced this phenomenon. The numbers have remained remarkably consistent across decades and continents, suggesting that whatever this feeling is, it belongs to the deep architecture of human experience. And yet, scientific investigation has generally produced no consistent evidence supporting the reality of scopaesthesia as a psychic phenomenon. The instruments of modern research have struggled to capture what millions of ordinary people insist they have felt. This tension between lived experience and laboratory results invites us to wonder. Perhaps the sensation of being watched has deep evolutionary roots. Your nervous system is essentially a threat prediction machine, constantly scanning the environment for signs of danger. Perhaps our ancestors, who could sense the gaze of a predator or a rival, survived to pass on their genes, and we carry that ancient vigilance in our bodies still. Or perhaps there is something more, something that science has not yet learned to measure. Let us travel now to a land between two rivers, to a time when the world was young, and human beings first learned to press their thoughts into clay. The evil eye originated in the ancient Near Eastern and Circum-Mediterranean area, where it is first encountered in the Sumerian literary record in the 3rd millennium before our Common Era. 5,000 years ago, in the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, the first great civilization of human history was rising from the mud of the Tigris and Euphrates. The Sumerians built cities of brick beneath a blazing sky, invented the wheel and the plough, and created the first system of writing the world had ever known. And among the very first things they wrote about was the power of the human gaze. The first accounts and artifacts related to the evil eye date back to ancient Mesopotamian civilizations. Discussion of the phenomenon was found in prayer, like inscriptions on cuneiform tablets from Sumer and Babylonia, dating between 3,300 and 3,000 before our era. The oldest written reference to the evil eye can be traced back to 5,000-year-old Sumerian incantations and myths in which the evil eye was dubbed the red snake or the eye of death. Imagine standing on that ancient plain, the smell of river mud and baking clay filling your nostrils, the sound of water moving through irrigation channels, the heat of the sun pressing down on your shoulders. In this world, the Mesopotamians believed it was the eyes. They believed the eye was the harbor of the soul, the creation of good and evil. To them, the eye connected the tangible nature of a human organ to the intangible concepts of spirituality and misfortune. The gaze was not passive. It reached out, it touched, it could bless or it could destroy. This was not superstition to them, but observed reality, as certain as the flooding of the rivers or the turning of the seasons. And they wrote it all down. The Sumerians developed a form of writing called cuneiform around 3000 before our Common Era. This script began as pictographic writing, but eventually developed into a purely phonetic system in which each sign stood for one or more syllables. This writing is called cuneiform because it consists of wedge-shaped marks which were inscribed into wet clay tablets with a reed stylus. Picture the scribe in his dim chamber, the soft clay tablets smooth beneath his hands, the sharpened reed held between practiced fingers. Each impression is deliberate, each wedge and line carrying meaning that will outlast kingdoms and empires. When the tablet is complete, it will be baked in fire or dried in the sun, and it will become nearly indestructible, capable of surviving 5,000 years of floods and wars and the slow grinding of time. Sumerian tablets inscribed in cuneiform on clay from approximately 3,500 to 2,000 before our Common Era in Mesopotamia are humanity's earliest literature, with over 500,000 artifacts holding administrative, legal, and mystical texts. We are extraordinarily fortunate that these ancient records have survived. The earliest written records of human civilization, etched in cuneiform script on clay tablets over 5,000 years ago, reveal remarkable spiritual insights. And now, in our own time, new tools are helping us read what was written so long ago. In 2023, The researchers at Tel Aviv and Ariel universities created an artificial intelligence system that translated Akkadian cuneiform with 97% accuracy, processing 69,000 lines of text. We are living in an age when the words of the ancient scribes are becoming accessible as never before, when the thoughts they pressed into clay are speaking to us across the vast gulf of millennia. There is something profound in this. The minds that wondered about the power of the gaze 5,000 years ago were not so different from our own. They felt the same prickle at the back of the neck, the same strange knowing when eyes fell upon them. They sought to understand it, to explain it, to protect themselves from its darker manifestations. And they left us their records. Tonight, we will read those records together. We will trace the Sumerian understanding of the eye and its powers, exploring their beliefs about divine gazes and mortal sight, about protection and danger, about the subtle forces that flow between conscious beings. We will examine the concept of the evil eye as they understood it, and we will discover the intricate systems they developed to defend against harmful attention. Then we will journey forward through time to the modern laboratory, where researchers continue to grapple with the mystery of scopesthesia. We will explore what neuroscience has learned about how our brains detect and respond to the gaze of others. We will consider the evolutionary pressures that may have shaped this sensitivity. And we will sit with the possibility that the ancient Sumerians, for all their differences from us, may have perceived something real about the nature of attention and consciousness, something that our science is only beginning to approach. This is not a journey toward proof. The mysteries we will explore tonight remain mysteries, held in the space between ancient intuition and modern measurement. But there is value in the exploration itself, in following the thread of human wonder across 5,000 years of asking the same question. Why can some of us feel when we are being watched? The river of time will carry us gently through these questions. There is no need to hurry. Let your breathing slow. Let the weight of the day settle and release. We have all the time we need to wander through the ages, to stand in the temples of ancient Sumer and the laboratories of contemporary science. Want to hold space for both the things we know and the things we cannot yet explain. The night is long and the story is patient. Let us begin. Let us travel now across the bridge of time to a land that existed long before the rise of Greece or Rome, long before the pyramids of Egypt reached their full glory, to a place where the very first cities rose from the marshlands and where humanity first learned to press thought into clay and make it permanent. This is Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, where the Tigris and the Euphrates flow southward from the mountains of Anatolia through vast alluvial plains before emptying into the Persian Gulf. The ancient Sumerians, one of the world's earliest civilizations, were known for their advanced society, flourishing around 4000 BC in what is present-day southern Iraq. Imagine standing on those plains 6,000 years ago as the sun sets behind the ziggurats, those stepped temple towers that reach toward heaven like stairways for the gods. The air is warm and heavy with the scent of river water and the distant smoke of cooking fires from 100 mud brick homes. Reed boats drift along canals that crisscross the landscape like veins carrying lifeblood to fields of barley and wheat. This is the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of civilization, where human beings first domesticated plants and animals, first built cities with tens of thousands of inhabitants, first developed systems of writing and mathematics and law. The rivers themselves seemed alive with divine power, their annual flooding bringing both destruction and renewal to the land. When the waters rose too high, entire villages could be swept away. When they receded, they left behind rich, dark silt that made the soil impossibly fertile. The Sumerians understood that they lived at the mercy of forces far greater than themselves, and this understanding shaped everything about how they saw the world. At night, when the work of the day was done and the lamps were extinguished, the sky above Mesopotamia blazed with stars more brilliant than most modern humans have ever seen. The same constellations we recognize today wheeled overhead as farmers and priests and scribes looked upward and wondered about their place in the cosmos. These were the same stars, the same moon, the same mysterious darkness that surrounds us still when we step outside on a clear night and feel the ancient vertigo of looking into infinity. The Sumerians mapped those stars with remarkable precision, tracking the movements of planets they associated with their gods, building their calendars around celestial cycles that connected the heavens to the turning of seasons on Earth. In this world, where everything was connected to everything else, where the floods came from distant mountains and the stars influenced the fate of kings, it made perfect sense that invisible forces might flow between living beings, that the gaze of a god or a demon, or even another human, might carry real power across the space between them. The Sumerians did not live alone in their universe, but shared it with a vast pantheon of divine beings who watched over every aspect of existence. The Anunnaki are a group of deities of the ancient Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. And in the earliest Sumerian writings about them, the Anunnaki are described as deities in the pantheon, descendants of An, who was the god of the heavens, and Kai, who was the goddess of earth. Their primary function was to decree the fates of humanity, which meant that every mortal life unfolded according to plans laid out in the divine realm. Above all other councils stood the seven who decree, the highest divine council in Sumerian mythology, composed of powerful gods who shaped the fate of the world through their rulings. These seven formed the backbone of cosmic law in Mesopotamian myth, gathering in their celestial assembly to determine which cities would prosper and which would fall, which kings would reign long and which would be cut short, which harvests would overflow the granaries and which would leave the people hungry. The great God, and presided over the heavens themselves, his presence felt in the vast blue dome of the sky and in the terrifying emptiness between the stars. Enlil commanded the wind and storms, his breath capable of leveling cities or bringing the gentle rains that made crops grow. Enki dwelt in the fresh waters beneath the earth, source of all the springs and rivers that sustained life, keeper of secret knowledge and divine wisdom. Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, embodied love and war and the planet Venus that blazed at dawn and dusk. Utu, the sun god, saw everything that happened under his light, making him the divine judge who could not be deceived. Nana, the moon god, measured out the months and watched over the night. These beings were not distant abstractions, but living presences that the Sumerians encountered daily through ritual and prayer and the careful observation of omens. The eye of a god is strongly associated with positivity, love, and protection in ancient Mesopotamia, and in many ways it was necessary to seek out the gaze of the gods and to revolve your life around their satisfaction for fear of the consequences of not doing so. To be seen by a benevolent deity was to receive blessing, protection, prosperity. The gods watched over their faithful worshippers the way a loving parent watches over a sleeping child, their attention itself a kind of shelter from the dangers of the world. This is why temple statues were so important, why priests labored to keep the divine images fed and clothed and honored. Sometimes a deity's cult statue would be transported to the location of a battle so that the deity could watch the battle unfold. The god or goddess present through their image to witness the courage of their people and to turn their protective gaze upon the warriors who fought in their name. But the divine gaze was not always benevolent. The same attention that could bless could also curse. A god who felt neglected or insulted might turn that watchful eye into an instrument of punishment, and there was nowhere to hide from beings who could see through walls and darkness and the secret chambers of the human heart. To understand how the Sumerians thought about power, including the power of the gaze, we must understand a concept that has no exact equivalent in modern languages: the me. In Mesopotamian culture, the me are rituals that were considered to be the property of the gods. And during the performance of a me, the respective deity incarnates itself in the person performing the ritual. The Sumerian religious and cultural life was based entirely on the me. These divine decrees or cosmic powers, bestowed by the gods that served as the foundational principles governing the universe, human civilization, and societal norms. They encompass over 100 specific elements, such as kingship, the arts of music and writing, the crafts of metalworking and weaving, rituals of worship, and ethical concepts like truth and peace, and the proper conduct of sexual union. The me were not merely ideas or rules, but something more like what we might call forces or technologies, encoded patterns that made civilization possible. The Sumerian tablets never actually describe what any of the maze look like, but they are clearly represented by physical objects of some sort. We know this from the famous myth of Inanna and Enki, in which the ambitious goddess of love travels to the Abzu, the underground freshwater sea where Enki, the god of wisdom, dwells. She flatters the old god and drinks with him until he grows generous in his cups and begins to give her his mess one by one. By the time Enki sobers up, Inanna has loaded all the mess into her boat and is sailing back to her city of Uruk. Not only were they stored in a prominent location in the Abzu, but Inanna is able to display them to the people of Uruk after she arrives with them in her boat. Some of them are indeed physical objects, such as musical instruments, but many are technologies like basket weaving or abstractions like victory. The me for kingship could be granted or withdrawn. The me for a craft could be taught or forgotten. And somewhere among these divine powers, threaded through the fabric of how reality itself was organized, was something that connected the act of seeing to the act of affecting. When the gods looked upon the world, their gaze carried power. When a priest performed the proper ritual, the me of the god flowed through them. And when certain eyes turned upon certain targets, something passed between them, something that could heal or harm, bless or curse. In this framework, the idea that a gaze might have real effects was not superstition, but physics, part of how the universe operated at its deepest level. The me were the source code of reality, and the Sumerians had identified the gaze as one of the channels through which that code executed its commands. This brings us to the darker aspect of Sumerian belief about the gaze, the phenomenon that would come to be known across the Mediterranean world as the evil eye. The evil eye in ancient Mesopotamia has received surprisingly little attention in recent research, and it has been suggested that the belief in the malefic gaze was much less prevalent in ancient Mesopotamia than initially thought by earlier generations of scholars. Yet the textual evidence paints a vivid picture of genuine fear. In the literature of ancient Mesopotamia, the eyes of gods, supernatural beings, animals, and humans were believed to cause illness, death, and damage on a large scale. The Sumerians believed in an array of gods and goddesses, each with their own domains and powers, and these deities were not always benevolent. Their ire or jealousy could manifest as a destructive gaze or eye of death that struck down mortals who had earned divine displeasure or simply been unlucky enough to draw the wrong kind of attention. Sumerian literature explains why the Sumerians conceived of the eye as an active organ that could do harm, and this conception stands in stark contrast to our modern scientific understanding of vision as a purely passive process of receiving light. For the Sumerians, something went out from the eye as well as coming in. The belief that a person, animal, or supernatural being can cause harm by a mere look is widely attested in many parts of the world, but in Mesopotamia, it found some of its earliest and most elaborate expression. Incantations have been recovered that were meant to ward off the evil eye. Prayers asking the gods for protection from malevolent gazes, both human and divine. The fear was not abstract but visceral. A mother feared for her newborn child, so soft and vulnerable, catching the envious eye of a neighbor whose own child had died. A merchant feared the jealous gaze of a competitor watching his profits grow. A soldier feared the cursing look of an enemy priest before battle. And everyone feared what might happen when the great gods above turned their terrible attention toward mortal affairs in anger. This was not metaphor to the ancient Sumerians, but lived reality, a danger as concrete as flood or famine, or the lions that prowled the edges of civilization. The eye projected power outward. The eye could wound without touching. The eye could kill without weapon or poison. And because the eye could do these things, because gaze carried force, it made perfect sense that one might feel when such force was directed at oneself, that the body might register the incoming attention of a watcher the way the body registers heat or cold or the pressure of the wind. To protect themselves from the harmful gaze, the Sumerians and their successors developed an elaborate material culture of defensive objects that has survived in archaeological deposits across the ancient Near East. In the nearby city of Tel Brak, amulets dubbed eye idols have been discovered, small alabaster figures with large eyes that seem to stare back at the viewer. These artifacts are not known to be explicitly connected to the evil eye, but scholars, including theologian John H. Eliot, have noted a probable correlation. The best supported theory associates these eye idols with the worship of the goddess Nin-Hersag, Sumerian goddess of childbirth, Eliot once wrote. These eye idols and the worship of the protecting goddess of childbirth were likely linked to evil eye belief, since newborns, infants, and birthing mothers have been deemed especially vulnerable to the evil eye in all evil eye cultures. Thousands of these eye idols have been found, their exaggerated eyes carved from precious materials and inlaid with stone, staring eternally outward as if to meet and deflect any incoming harmful gaze. The eyes of divine statues were crafted with a particular care and extraordinary expense. Both the shells and lapis lazuli materials needed to construct the eyes had to be imported over large distances. The shells from the Persian Gulf and lapis lazuli from the distant mountains of Afghanistan, carried by donkey caravans across hundreds of miles of difficult terrain. The blue lapis lazuli stone, in particular, is of extremely high importance because it is considered to be apotropaic, meaning it wards off evil. The reason that lapis lazuli was inlaid into the eyes of so many religious statues was because it was believed that objects of a blue color in particular would drive away the evil eye. This is why blue remains the traditional color of evil eye amulets to this day, from the nazar beads that hang in Turkish doorways to the hamsa hands painted on walls throughout the Mediterranean. 5,000 years after Sumerian craftsmen pressed lapis lazuli into the eye sockets of temple statues, people around the world still wear blue eye amulets for protection, a continuous thread of practice linking the modern tourist buying a souvenir in Istanbul to the ancient worshipper placing an offering before Ninhursag. The investment of resources tells us something important about how seriously these beliefs were held. Lapis lazuli was worth more than gold by weight in the ancient world, and yet communities chose to spend it on protective eyes rather than on other luxuries or necessities. The trade routes that brought this stone from mountains 2,000 miles away were maintained for millennia, specifically because people believed that the color blue could defend them from malevolent gazes. This is not the behavior of people engaged in casual superstition, but of people who genuinely believed that invisible forces traveled between the eyes of the watcher and the body of the watched. That attention itself was a kind of energy that could help or harm, and that material objects properly crafted and consecrated could intercept or deflect that energy before it did damage. The eye idols stared back. The lapis lazuli shone blue. And in the temples and homes of ancient Mesopotamia, people slept a little easier, knowing they had done what they could to protect themselves from the power of the gaze. And so, we cross now a great threshold in our journey together, moving from the ancient world of clay tablets and divine decrees into the gleaming corridors of modern science, where a different kind of priest holds court the researcher in the white laboratory coat, seeking to explain what the Sumerians once attributed to the gods. Yet here is something remarkable to consider. As we make this crossing, the phenomenon itself has not changed, not one bit. The same sensation that caused an ancient scribe in to pause his work and glance over his shoulder 5,000 years ago is the very same feeling that causes you to turn in a crowded cafe today. Different cultures throughout history recognized what it feels like when somebody stares at them. And this recognition spans not merely centuries but millennia. Not merely one civilization, but dozens, scattered across every continent where humans have walked. The feeling transcends language and religion and technology and social structure. It appears in the writings of ancient China and medieval Europe, in the oral traditions of indigenous peoples and the casual conversations of modern city dwellers. Something this persistent, this universal, demands our attention and our curiosity. The transition from religious explanation to scientific inquiry did not happen overnight. It was a gradual process spanning centuries as the Enlightenment swept across Europe, bringing with it a new faith in reason and observation. The old explanations began to seem inadequate to many thinkers. The idea that gods watched from above, or that evil spirits could harm through a glance, was relegated to the category of superstition, replaced by mechanical models of the universe, where everything could be measured and quantified. And yet the feeling remained. People continued to sense when they were being watched, continued to turn and find eyes upon them. And so, by the late 19th and early 20th century, organizations like the Society for Psychical Research started conducting systematic research into such happenings. These early investigators occupied a strange middle ground between the mysticism of the past and the materialism of the present. They wanted to apply scientific methods to phenomena that science had largely dismissed. But their very interest in such topics often placed them outside the mainstream of academic respectability. Something was lost in this great transition from temple to laboratory. The ancient framework, however strange it might seem, to modern minds provided a coherent explanation. For the phenomenon, the eye projected power and attention outward. This power could affect others, therefore feeling watched was simply feeling the impact of another's projected gaze. It made sense within its own logic. The scientific worldview that replaced it offered no such coherent explanation. Indeed, it seemed to render the phenomenon impossible, since eyes were understood only to receive light, not to project anything outward. And yet something was gained as well. The scientific method, for all its limitations, offered a new kind of rigor, a new way of testing claims against evidence, a new humility before the complexity of nature. The early researchers may not have solved the mystery, but they began to document it carefully, to gather data, to propose hypotheses that could be tested. This was a different kind of knowing than the ancient priests, and possessed, but it was knowing nonetheless, and it has carried us forward to where we stand today, still wondering, still questioning, still feeling that ancient prickle on the back of our necks. The first scientist to seriously investigate this curious phenomenon was a psychologist named Edward Bradford Titchener, working at Cornell University in the final years of the 19th century. And his story begins not in a laboratory, but in a classroom, where young minds gathered to learn the new science of psychology. The concept first emerged in 1898 through his careful observations, and what he noticed was striking. In its ordinariness, students in his classes kept reporting the same experience they claimed to sense when someone was looking at them from behind a sensation often described as an uncomfortable stiffness or tingling in their necks. This was not one student or two, but many, and they came forward independently without knowing that others had reported the same thing. Titchener's exploration began with his classroom observations, and he listened carefully as students reported feeling watched during lectures and tests. They suggested that this awareness could be so strong it sometimes compelled them to turn around and check if someone really was staring at them. Titchener was a rigorous thinker, trained in the German tradition of experimental psychology, and he was determined to find a rational explanation for what his students described. He rejected the telepathic explanation outright. The idea that some kind of mental energy passed from watcher to watched seemed to him unscientific, a relic of superstitious thinking that had no place in a modern understanding of the mind. Instead, he proposed something far more elegant and mechanical when a subject experienced the feeling that they were being watched and turned to check a second person who already had the subject in their field of vision, might notice the subject starting to turn their head and shift their gaze to meet them from the subject's perspective. They have turned their head and can now see a person looking directly at them, from which they may incorrectly assume that the person had been staring at them all along. It was a kind of illusion born of timing and expectation. As for the physical sensation, Titchener attributed the tingling effect to the subject focusing their attention on their own neck. Once you start thinking about being watched, he reasoned, you become hyper-aware of the sensations in your neck and upper back sensations that were always there, but usually go unnoticed. This explanation was elegant in its simplicity, and it seemed to preserve the scientific worldview that Titchener held dear. No mysterious energies, no telepathic communication, just ordinary psychology and the quirks of human attention. And yet, for all its elegance, the explanation leaves something wanting. It accounts well for some cases. Certainly the situations where you turn and immediately catch someone's eye. But what of the cases where you turn and the watcher quickly looks away before you complete your rotation? What of the reports from surveillance officers and security professionals who claim they have learned not to stare directly at suspects because the suspects so often seem to sense it? What of the experiences reported not just in crowded rooms, but in open spaces where the watcher is far away and the watched has not peripheral vision, no subtle cues to rely upon? Titchener's explanation does not easily accommodate these cases, and though he was a brilliant scientist, his theory has not proven to be the final word on the matter. The mystery persisted, and it would take nearly a century before another researcher would pick up the thread and pursue it with comparable rigor, though from a very different perspective. Since the late 1980s, one scientist has dedicated himself more thoroughly than any other to investigating this ancient mystery, and his name is Rupert Sheldrake, a British biologist trained at Cambridge and Harvard, who gave up a conventional academic career to pursue questions that most of his colleagues considered unanswerable or worse. Unscientific Sheldrake has written extensively about his research, stating that he has been investigating this sense of being stared at, formerly termed scopisthesia, which has wide implications for the nature of our minds, our vision, and the world at large. His approach has been both ambitious and controversial, combining large-scale experiments with extensive collection of case histories from people who claim to have experienced the phenomenon firsthand. The significant positive scores in his experiments, according to Sheldrake, confirm that the feeling is a real phenomenon that depends on factors as yet unknown to science. This is a bold claim, and it has not gone unchallenged by the scientific establishment. Sheldrake's broader theoretical framework, known as morphic resonance, has been rejected by numerous critics on many grounds, and has been labeled pseudoscience and magical thinking. By some, these grounds include the lack of evidence for it, according to critics, and its inconsistency with established scientific theories. And yet, the experimental data Sheldrake has gathered on scopisthesia specifically deserves consideration on its own merits. Separate from his more controversial theoretical proposals, vision may involve a two-way process. Sheldrake explains an inward movement of light and an outward projection of mental images. This idea echoes the ancient extramission theory that the Sumerians and Greeks and Romans all seem to intuit, but it frames it in terms that attempt to engage with modern scientific understanding. Thousands of trials conducted by anyone who downloaded the experimental protocol from Sheldrake's website have given positive, repeatable, and highly significant results, implying that there is indeed a widespread sensitivity to being stared at from behind. The experiments are simple in design. One person stares at the back of another person's head, while the second person reports whether they feel watched. Statistical analysis then determines whether the guesses are more accurate than chance alone. And according to Sheldrake, they consistently are not by a huge margin, but by enough to suggest something real is happening. Beyond simple random noise, perhaps even more compelling than the laboratory experiments, is the vast collection of case histories Sheldrake has assembled over the decades. In one recent study, researchers examined the natural history of the phenomenon, based on a collection of 960 case histories collected over 25 years, involving both humans and non-human animals. This collection includes more than 80 interviews with surveillance officers, detectives, martial arts teachers, celebrity photographers, wildlife photographers, and hunters who have extensive experience of watching people or non-human animals. These are not credulous believers in the paranormal. They are professionals whose livelihoods depend on their ability to observe without being detected. And many of them report the same thing that people and animals often seem to know when they are being watched. In 466 cases, fully 49% of the collection directional effects were explicit in that the person or animal looked at responded by turning and looking directly back at the looker, not in a random direction, but precisely back toward the source of the gaze. This finding, if it holds up, is remarkable because Titchener's mechanical explanation cannot account for it. How would the watched person know not only that they were being watched, but from which direction the watching eyes were looking? Some other mechanism must be at work here, whether it is something mundane that science has not yet identified, or something more mysterious that challenges our current understanding of mind and matter. We cannot say with certainty, but the question remains open and the data continues to accumulate. Within the gleaming chambers of modern neuroscience laboratories, researchers have begun to map the biological substrates of this ancient sensation, and what they have found suggests that the feeling of being watched is far from imaginary, even if its ultimate cause remains debated. Functional magnetic resonance imaging scans reveal specific patterns of brain activity during periods when an individual feels they are being watched. This indicates that there exists concrete biological bases of scopaesthesia in human brains. Something is happening in there, something measurable and real, even if we cannot yet fully explain what triggers it. The key player in this neural drama is a small almond-shaped structure buried deep within the temporal lobe of the brain known as the amygdala. This ancient brain region, far older than the cerebral cortex that enables human reasoning, plays a central role in assessing threats and triggering your fear response when a threat feels imminent and unavoidable. Deeper brain regions activate alongside it, producing freezing rapid heart rate. And that visceral sense of dread that you have felt when you sense someone watching you from behind the amygdala is essentially an alarm system honed by millions of years of evolution, and it is extraordinarily sensitive to anything that might signal danger, including, and perhaps especially, the attention of other minds. The sensation of being watched arises from fast, specialized, and conservative perceptual and social brain systems that integrate peripheral visual cues. Prediction and emotional state. Your brain is constantly building models of the world around you, predicting what will happen next, and updating those predictions based on incoming sensory data when something violates the predictions. When attention falls upon you from an unexpected direction, the brain registers this discrepancy and signals alarm, even before conscious awareness catches up. This is why the feeling often precedes the knowing. You sense something is wrong, a moment before you understand what it is. Scopaesthesia is primal. It does not take much to discern any potential danger. Like predators, our distant ancestors lived in a world full of things that wanted to now eat them, and the ones who survived were the ones who noticed when predatory eyes were fixed upon them. Before the predator struck, the ones who failed to notice became meals, not ancestors. Some researchers suggest that humans have an innate capacity to perceive attention from other people due to evolutionary advantages. Probably this can be explained by the need to watch out for predators or understand intentions of members within a social group. Knowing when the alpha male was watching. You knowing when a rival was sizing you up for a fight. Knowing when a potential mate was interested. All of these social calculations depended on detecting the attention of others. And those who were skilled at such detection had significant advantages in the brutal competition of survival and reproduction. The evolutionary logic here is compelling, and it explains why the brain would develop such exquisite sensitivity to being watched. The cost of a false alarm was wasted energy, a moment of unnecessary vigilance, perhaps an interrupted meal or a disrupted rest. But the cost of missing a real threat was death, so the system is biased toward caution, toward seeing watchers, even when none are there, toward feeling eyes upon you. At the slightest cue, this might explain why we so often feel watched. Even when we are alone, our brains are running ancient software designed for a world far more dangerous than the one most of us inhabit today. And that software cannot easily be updated or turned off. There is one more thread to consider as we weave together this tapestry of ancient belief and modern science, and it concerns the very nature of vision itself. How do we see what actually happens when light enters our eyes and images form in our minds? The answer might seem obvious to us now, trained as we are in the modern scientific worldview. Light bounces off. Objects enters through the pupil, is focused by the lens, strikes the retina and triggers neural signals that travel to the brain, where they are processed into the experience of sight. This is called the intromission theory of vision, and it has dominated Western scientific thought since Johannes Kepler discovered the formation of retinal images in 1604. But this was not always the dominant theory, and it is not the only way humans have understood the act of seeing, the sense of being stared at. Or scopaesthesia is very common, and its existence is supported by experimental evidence. However, it contravenes the standard scientific assumption dating back to Kepler's discovery that vision involves only the inward movement of light intromission, but not the outward movement of images or attention. Extramission from this point of view. Scopaesthesia is impossible, yet paradoxically, the conventional explanation of virtual images in mirrors is still based on Euclid's ancient extramission theory, and most people implicitly believe in visual extramission when they speak of casting a glance or shooting a look or meeting someone's eyes. The language itself preserves an intuition that modern science has supposedly disproven in ancient Greek and Roman optics. It was theorized that vision occurs as light or some other emanation is emitted from the eye and hits the object of vision, enabling the eye to send energy to the physical objects. This extramission theory was not merely a prescientific error. It was a sophisticated attempt to explain the phenomenology of vision. The felt experience of reaching out with one's eyes and touching the world. The Sumerians knew this intuition 5,000 years ago, and they built an entire cosmology around it. The evil eye, the divine gaze, the power of attention to affect the physical world. The sense of being stared at is the basis of evil eye beliefs, which are regarded as superstitions. Because the emission of any form of energy from the human eye has been rejected by Western science. But what if the rejection was premature? What if the ancient intuition captured something real about the nature of mind and attention? Something that our current scientific models are not equipped to explain. This is not to say that we should abandon modern optics or return to believing in literal rays emanating from our eyes. But perhaps there is room for humility, here room to acknowledge that consciousness remains deeply mysterious and that the relationship between mind and world may be more intimate and bidirectional than our models currently allow. When virtually every culture throughout human history has reported the same phenomenon when careful experiments produce statistically significant results. When thousands of professionals who depend on stealth report that their targets seem to sense their gaze. Perhaps it is worth pausing before dismissing it all as coincidence and confirmation bias. The ancient peoples who pressed their beliefs into clay tablets were not fools. They were acute observers of the world around them and of the subtle currents of attention and intention that flowed between human beings. Perhaps they perceived something real, something that we, in our confidence in the completeness of modern science, have been too quick to explain away. We stand now at the edge of mystery, at the boundary between what science can explain and what it cannot. And this is a good place to stand. A humble place, an open place. The feeling of being watched may one day be fully explained by some extension of our current understanding, or it may point towards something genuinely new, something that will require us to expand our models of mind and matter and consciousness. We cannot know yet which it will be, and there is wisdom in not knowing, in holding the question open, in remaining curious without demanding certainty. This is what the ancient Sumerians might teach us if we listen not to the specific content of their beliefs, which were shaped by their time and place, but the underlying recognition that the world is full of mysteries that deserve our attention and our respect. And so, we arrive at a place of gathering, a quiet clearing where the threads of our journey begin to weave themselves together. And what emerges is not a simple answer, but something far more interesting. A pattern that stretches across the vast expanse of human time, connecting the reed stylus pressed into wet clay 5,000 years ago to the brain scanner humming in a modern laboratory, connecting the Sumerian mother who hung a blue stone above her infant's cradle to the Turkish grandmother who still places the nazar, the watchful eye of glass, above her doorway. And when we step back and allow ourselves to see this pattern, we notice something remarkable, something that invites us to sit with it gently, which is simply this. Across 5 millennia of human experience, across the rise and fall of empires, across revolutions in thought and technology, Across every transformation in how we explain the world to ourselves, the feeling of being watched has persisted, unchanged in its essential nature, described in almost identical terms by people separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles. And this persistence is itself a kind of data, a form of evidence that deserves our attention and our respect. Because when something remains constant across such vast stretches of time and culture, it suggests that we are touching something fundamental about human experience, something woven into the very fabric of what it means to be a conscious being, moving through a world filled with other conscious beings. And the research tells us that this sensitivity likely extends far beyond humans. Are that non-human animals share this same kind of awareness, which gives new significance to the ancient dance of predator and prey, to the subtle negotiations of mating and courtship, to the complex social systems that emerge when creatures must navigate a world of watching and being watched. And when we trace the journey of that simple protective symbol, the eye rendered in blue stone or glass or paint, we find it moving like a river through time, from the alabaster eye idols of Tel Brak to the lapis lazuli eyes of Sumerian statues, from the protective amulets of ancient Babylon to the evil eye beads sold in the bazaars of Istanbul today. The same blue, the same watchful gaze, the same intuition that something in the act of looking carries power, and that power can be deflected or absorbed by the symbol of an eye that watches back. And what does it mean that we still feel what the Sumerians felt? That a person today can stand in a crowd and sense the weight of attention on their back, just as a person might have 5,000 years ago in the streets of Ur. What does it mean that our technology has advanced beyond anything the ancients could have imagined? And yet this simple sensation remains exactly as it was, undiminished and unexplained by our most sophisticated instruments. It means perhaps that some truths transcend the frameworks we create to explain them, that some aspects of human experience are more fundamental than any theory, whether ancient or modern. And this brings us to consider what the Sumerians themselves might have known, not despite their lack of modern science, but perhaps because of their different way of attending to the world. Because the medical practitioners of ancient Sumer, the healers they called Asu, combined careful observation with what we would call spiritual practices. They watched their patients with the same attention. They believed the gods watched humanity. They noticed patterns and correspondences. They recorded what they saw on clay tablets that have survived to speak to us across the ages. And these texts reveal an approach to health and illness and the human condition that was grounded in both empirical observation and spiritual belief, not as contradictory impulses, but as complementary ways of knowing. And perhaps this integration gave them access to dimensions of experience that our more divided modern consciousness tends to overlook, perhaps when you do not separate the natural from the supernatural. When you do not draw a hard line between the observer and the observed, you become sensitive to subtleties that a more fragmented awareness might miss. And we must be careful here not to romanticize the past or to claim that ancient peoples had access to truths we have lost. But we can at least entertain the possibility, hold it gently as a question rather than an answer, that their framework for understanding the power of the gaze captured something real, something our current models have not yet found a place for. And when we approach ancient wisdom with this humility, we open ourselves to a different kind of learning, one that honors the intelligence of those who came before us while remaining honest about the limits of what we can know. And speaking of limits, we must also acknowledge what modern science cannot yet explain. Because the phenomena we have explored tonight raise profound issues regarding consciousness itself. What is its nature and where do its boundaries lie? Does our awareness extend beyond what we typically consider the edges of the self, beyond the skull, beyond the skin, into the space between us and other minds? These questions continue to challenge and expand our understanding of what it means to be conscious. And researchers are still debating, still pushing the limits of human perception to discover whether subtle cues, heightened attentiveness, or even unknown sensory mechanisms might explain the sense of being watched. And this ongoing debate is itself a sign of scientific health, because science at its best is not a fixed body of knowledge, but a process of inquiry, a method for asking questions and testing answers. A humble acknowledgement that what we know today may be revised by what we learn tomorrow. And history gives us many examples of ideas that were once dismissed as impossible, only to be later vindicated by new evidence and new understanding. The existence of atoms, the reality of continental drift, the presence of bacteria too small to see. Each of these was once considered absurd by the scientific consensus of its day. And this is not to say that every rejected idea will eventually be proven true, only that the boundary between the explained and the unexplained is always shifting. And phenomena that do not fit our current models deserve not dismissal, but careful attention, because they may be pointing toward the next expansion of our understanding, the next frontier where human knowledge will grow. And perhaps the sense of being watched is one such phenomenon, sitting at the edge of what we can explain, inviting us to look more closely, to ask better questions, to remain open to possibilities we cannot yet imagine. And so, where does this leave us? You who have journeyed with me through these hours, through the clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia and the laboratories of modern neuroscience, through theories of extramission and brain scans of the amygdala, through the watchful eyes of Sumerian gods and the protective blue of the Nazar. Where does it leave us in our own lives, walking through our own days, occasionally feeling that peculiar sensation of being observed? And perhaps the most honest answer is this: it leaves us with the mystery intact, which is not a failure, but a gift. Because the practical reality remains that most of us have felt watched at one time or another. Most of us have turned to find eyes upon us. Most of us have known that strange certainty that comes from somewhere beyond our conscious reasoning. And whether this feeling is fully explained by peripheral vision and unconscious pattern recognition, or whether it hints at some deeper connection between minds that science has not yet mapped, the feeling itself is real. It is part of the texture of human experience, and we do not need to solve it to live with it, to honor it, to let it remind us that consciousness remains in many ways a mystery to itself. And perhaps what ancient wisdom offers modern life is simply this permission. Permission to dwell in uncertainty, permission to hold multiple explanations without needing to choose between them. Permission to feel wonder at the ordinary strangeness of being a conscious creature in a world of other conscious creatures. All of us looking and being looked upon. All of us reaching out with our awareness into a shared space that connects us, even when we cannot explain how. And as you listen to these words, perhaps in the quiet of evening, perhaps with eyes growing heavy and thoughts beginning to soften towards sleep, allow yourself to return to that simple sensation we began with, the feeling of standing in a room, of attention touching you like a gentle hand on the shoulder, of turning to meet another gaze and notice how ancient that moment is, how it connects you to every human who has ever lived, to the Sumerian scribe who paused in his work to look up and meet the eyes of a passerby, to the Babylonian mother who sensed someone watching her child and turned with protective instinct, to all the countless moments across all the centuries when consciousness touched consciousness through the mysterious medium of the gaze. And rest now in that connection, in that long, unbroken thread of human experience. And let the mystery hold you gently as you breathe and rest, and simply allow yourself to be watched over by the same stars that watched over the ancient cities of Mesopotamia, held in the same darkness that has held every sleeping human since the beginning of time, safe in the knowledge that some questions are not meant to be answered, but only to be lived deeply and wonderingly as we make our brief passage through this world of eyes and light and consciousness and shadow. And so we come now to the closing of our journey together. A journey that has carried us across 5,000 years of human wondering. 5,000 years of the same question asked in different tongues and written in different scripts. And as we prepare to rest, it feels right to pause and look back across that vast expanse of time, to see it not as a distant and foreign landscape, but as a continuous thread of which we are the living continuation. For somewhere in the ancient land between two rivers, in a city of mud, brick and starlight, a Sumerian scribe once sat in the cooling evening air and pressed a sharpened reed into soft, wet clay, forming the wedge-shaped marks that would carry a thought across millennia. And that scribe perhaps looked up from the work and felt a sudden awareness, a prickling sensation at the back of the neck, and turned to find a fellow citizen watching from across the courtyard. And in that moment, the scribe experienced precisely what you have experienced countless times in your own life, the same inexplicable knowing, the same ancient recognition that passes between conscious beings. And that scribe may have wondered, as you have wondered, what invisible thread connects gazing eyes to knowing minds. And though the words were different and the explanations framed in the language of gods and divine powers, the underlying question was identical to the one asked today in modern laboratories, where researchers study brain scans and measure galvanic skin responses. Identical to the question you yourself may have pondered in quiet moments. And this is perhaps the most remarkable discovery of our exploration tonight. That not any single answer, but the recognition that we are part of an unbroken lineage of questioners, that consciousness reflecting upon itself is among the most ancient of human activities, that the clay tablets of Sumer and the digital archives of contemporary neuroscience are chapters in the same ongoing story, the story of beings who are aware that they are aware and who cannot help but wonder at the mystery of that awareness. And when we recognize this continuity, something softens within us. Some sense of isolation dissolves. For we are not alone in our wondering. We never have been. And across the centuries, the questions echo and reverberate, changing form, but never quite finding final resolution, which may itself be the point. For perhaps certain questions are not problems to be solved, but rather doorways through which we enter more deeply into the mystery of being alive. And now let us turn our attention to the phenomenon that has woven through this entire exploration, the gaze itself, that remarkable capacity of conscious beings to direct attention outward and to receive the attention of others. For every human who has ever walked upon this earth has looked and been looked upon, has sent the light of awareness out through their eyes and received the awareness of others in return. And this mutual exchange of gazes is so fundamental to human existence that we rarely pause to consider how extraordinary it truly is. Yet consider this. When your eyes meet the eyes of another person, something passes between you that words struggle to capture. A moment of mutual recognition, an acknowledgement that each of you exists as a center of experience, as a point of view upon the universe, and in that moment of eye contact there is both vulnerability and connection. For to truly meet someone's gaze is to allow yourself to be seen, to be known, to be touched at a level deeper than words. And the Sumerians understood this, which is why they depicted their gods with enormous eyes, wide and watchful, eyes of lapis lazuli that could see into the depths of the human heart, and which is why they wore protective amulets to deflect the harmful gaze of those who wished them ill. For they knew that the eyes are not merely passive receivers of light, but active participants in a profound and mysterious exchange. And across the 5,000 years since those first protective amulets were crafted, the blue eye symbol has traveled from Mesopotamia to ancient Egypt to Greece and Rome, and onward through the Byzantine Empire and the Ottoman centuries, until it hangs today in homes and businesses and automobiles around the world, a testament to the enduring human intuition that gazes carry power, that attention itself is a force that can be felt. And when we acknowledge this intuition, we begin to understand why the feeling of being watched is so universal, why it appears in every culture and every era, why it persists despite our modern explanations and our scientific frameworks, for it touches something fundamental about what it means to be a conscious being among other conscious beings, vulnerable to being seen and capable of truly seeing others. And perhaps the Sumerians, looking up at the same stars that wheel above us tonight, understood this better than we sometimes credit. Perhaps their explanation of divine gazes and protective powers captured something essential that our more mechanical descriptions sometimes miss. And as we sit with this possibility, we are invited into a different relationship with mystery, one that does not demand final answers, one that finds richness in questions that remain open. For there is a kind of peace that comes from releasing the need to resolve every uncertainty, a spaciousness that opens when we allow some things to simply be what they are, unexplained and perhaps unexplainable, wondrous precisely because they exceed our current capacity to understand. And the ancient Sumerians and the modern scientists, and you yourself, all share in this condition of partial knowing, of glimpsing patterns without grasping their complete design. And rather than a failure, this is perhaps the very essence of the human position, to stand at the edge of mystery and peer into depths we cannot fully fathom, to ask questions that may never receive complete answers, to wonder and to keep wondering. And there is something beautiful in this, something that connects us not only to our ancestors, but to those who will come after us, who will inherit our questions and add their own, who will perhaps come closer to understanding and perhaps discover only deeper mysteries beneath the ones they solve. And in accepting our place in this endless inquiry, we find an unexpected freedom, the freedom to rest in not knowing, to let the questions settle like sediment in still water, revealing clarity not through agitation, but through patience and stillness. And so, as our journey together draws toward its close, let us now turn our attention inward, toward the body, toward the breath, toward the present moment where past and future dissolve into simple being. For you have traveled far tonight, across continents and centuries, through ancient temples and modern laboratories. And now it is time to rest, to allow the weight of all that information to settle, to let your body receive the support of whatever surface holds you, the bed or chair or floor that presses gently against you. And notice now how your body feels. Perhaps there is tension in the shoulders that can soften. Perhaps the jaw holds some tightness that can release. And the breath continues its patient rhythm without any effort on your part. For the body knows how to breathe, knows how to rest, knows how to surrender to the pull of sleep. And as your eyes grow heavy and the lids begin to close, notice how the darkness that greets you is not empty, but full of rest and restoration, full of dreams that may come. And in this darkness you are held. Just as the earth holds all things upon its surface, just as the night holds the sleeping world in its gentle embrace. And you can release now any remaining thoughts about what we have discussed. Let them settle and integrate in their own time. For the work of understanding does not require your waking attention. The deeper mind will sort and store and connect in ways that need no conscious effort. And you are safe here in the darkness behind your eyelids, safe as the Sumerians were safe in their reed houses 5,000 years ago, looking up at the same constellations that wheel above you now, the same stars that have watched over sleeping humans since the first of our kind lay down upon the earth and surrendered to the night. And generation after generation has passed through this threshold of sleep and awakening, this daily death and rebirth. And you too are part of this ancient rhythm, this pulse of consciousness that has never ceased since the first human drew breath. And as you sink now toward the welcoming darkness you carry with you, the weight of all those who have wandered before you, all those who have felt the mystery of consciousness pressing against the edges of understanding, and you add your own wondering to theirs, your own questions joining the vast chorus of human inquiry that stretches back to the clay tablets of Sumer and forward into futures we cannot imagine. And in this moment, you are both ancient and utterly present, both part of an endless chain and completely yourself. And the darkness welcomes you. The silence receives you. The night holds you as it has held all sleeping beings since time began. And the breath slows and deepens, and the body grows heavy and still. And the mind releases its grip on wakefulness. And like water finding its way to the sea, you flow now toward rest, toward restoration, toward the sweet oblivion of sleep. And the questions that brought us together tonight can rest now too, can settle into the quiet depths where understanding ripens without effort. And you are safe, you are held, you are home. And the ancient stars keep their watch above a sleeping world. And somewhere in the space between memory and dream, the gaze of all those who have wandered before you meets your own, a moment of recognition across the ages. And then even this dissolves into the deep and dreamless peace of true rest, and you surrender to the night as countless generations have surrendered before you, trusting that the morning will bring you back renewed, trusting that the mystery will still be there, waiting for you, patient and inexhaustible. And for now, there is only this breath and the next breath, and the gentle weight of your body against the earth, and the soft darkness that receives all things. And sleep comes now. Sleep comes easy and deep, and you let it take you. You let it carry you down into the quiet depths where all questions rest, where all wondering pauses, where there is only peace and stillness, and the slow rhythm of a resting heart. And the night enfolds you like a mother enfolding a child. And you are safe. You are whole. You are exactly where you need to be. And the long journey of human wandering continues without you for these few hours while you rest and dream and restore. And when you wake, the mystery will still be there, shimmering at the edges of understanding, inviting you once more into its depths. But for now, there is only rest, only peace, only the gentle surrender to the ancient rhythm of sleep. And so we leave you here at the threshold of dreams, held by the darkness, watched over by the same stars that watched over the Sumerians as they slept beside the Euphrates 5,000 years ago. Part of an unbroken chain of conscious beings who have wandered and rested and wondered again. And in this resting, you honor them. And in this wandering, you join them. And in this moment where consciousness meets the mystery of itself, there is nothing to do but let go, nothing to solve, nothing to understand, only this breath and this body and this peace and this slow, sweet descent into sleep.